لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. أهلا وسهلا ومرحبا بكم. Welcome back to our course on understanding Shafi fiqh, which is of course based on Imam al-Shatiri's al-Yaqut, al-Nafis explained, and this is a level 3 course. This is our 5th lesson in the course, in which we cover principles, maxims and practical application of sacred law according to the Shafi'i school bi'idhnillah ta'ala. In this lesson we start looking at ghusl, the ritualistic bathing. We define it and its purpose and its application bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. The course outcomes, which remain fairly consistent throughout the course insha'Allah ta'ala, is not listed. There we go. Is to grasp the core legal principles, approach fiqh systematically and methodologically, to connect basic knowledge with real life, to access a contemporary text used by scholars and students, and to master definitions, conditions and applications of fiqh. In this specific lesson, bi'idhnillah ta'ala, we seek to learn about the causes that necessitate ghusl, right? What exactly would necessitate ghusl? What would cause you to have to perform a ghusl? And then how do you perform ghusl correctly according to the Shafi'i school? In other words, what are the rules that you need to know for your ghusl to be valid? And then finally, we try to distinguish between obligations, sunnahs and disliked acts. And we will cover this topic over 2 lessons bi'idhnillah ta'ala. Some key concepts to take note of in the lesson would be concepts of janaba, which is the state of sexual defilement or the state that you are in after experiencing sexual intimacy. Hayd, which is your monthly menstrual period for a woman. Nifas is postnatal or postpartum bleeding. And then of course there's the difference between a fard and a sunnah ghusl. Essentially the ruling matches with the extent of the need, and we'll explain what that means when we get there inshallah. And then also another key concept is the prohibitions for those in the state of janaba. We need to be aware of what we can and cannot do in the state of not having ghusl, right? Or in the state of being in sexual defilement or after having engaged in sexual intimacy. And then we also speak about some of the conditions and the recommendations of ghusl, insha'Allah ta'ala. A quick question based on our previous lesson. What can be done instead of washing the feet in wudu when wearing khufs? Now, khufs are leather socks, but they can also be made of something else, right? So A, nothing. The feet must always be washed. B, wiping over part of the upper surface of the khufs. C, wiping the bottom of the khufs. And D, sprinkling water over the khufs. Now, of course, we are only asking what can be done, right? Not what is the optimum, what is the minimum, in other words. What can be done would basically be what is the minimum. And the answer is B. Wiping over part of the upper surface of the khufs would be sufficient to replace washing one's feet. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Tamam. So that is the question to start us off. Now we commence with the text. قال المصنف رحمه الله تعالى ونفعنا الله بعلومه وعلومكم آمين. Al-Ghusl, washing. Now, ghusl and every other topic in fiqh is dealt with in this same manner. We commence by defining the concept lughatan, lexically. That essentially means that you are defining the concept as to how it is understood based on the language, how it is understood based on the Arabic word. So that is ghusl lughatan. And that's the standard practice. We always in fiqh try to understand something from its lexical perspective then its technical perspective, and then we draw the link in between the two, which helps us to understand. So lughatan, according to the dictionary, al-ghusl means as-saylan, which essentially means washing, right? For water to flow over a particular body part. Wa shar'an, technically or religiously or Islamically, saylanul ma, ghusl means flowing of water, ala jami'il badani, over the entire body. Jami'il badani literally means the entire body, so every single surface area of the body. Biniyatin makhsusatin, with a specific intention, meaning it's not just the random washing of limbs, but it's the washing of the entire body that is attached to a specific intention. The next topic of conversation is mujibatul ghusl. Awjaba yujibu ijaban mujibun. On the fourth scale, the word wajaba yajibu means to make obligatory, to make compulsory, to necessitate. So mujibat on the Jam Mu'annath Salim form means those factors which necessitate al-ghusl, which necessitate washing. And again, here, ghusl is to be distinguished from ghusl. Ghusl is purely just washing. So ghuslul yadayn, washing of the hands, ghuslul malabis, washing the clothes, etc. But al-ghusl is a specific type of washing that can probably be translated best as a ritualistic bath. So in Islam, we require different states of purity for different forms of ibadah. And there are different unclean states that we combat with these acts of purification. So we've already learned about the wudu, which removes the minor state of impurity, known as hadathul asghar. But now we are talking about the ghusl, which is the major form of washing, and that's the ritualistic bath, which removes al-hadath al-akbar, the major form of spiritual impurity. So this is not a washing that one does because one is dirty physically. So there's dirt on one's body or you smell, of perspiration, etc. That's not the primary objective here. Even though when it comes to the sunnah or recommended bathing, then yes, some of that would be covered. But the required bathing, the absolutely religiously necessary bathing, would be the one that we are speaking about now, which is a ghusl. Now, what necessitates a ghusl? This is an important discussion here because we want to know what are the things that would make us have to perform a ghusl. So, mujibatul ghusli sittatun. Those aspects or factors which necessitate a ghusl, they are 6 in number. Al-awwalu, the first is ilajul hashafati. Ilaju, the entering of al-hashafati, of the head, the gland of the male sex organ, fil farji, in the vagina, into the vagina, the private organ of a woman. So there's a few things that we need to clarify here. Some of them we've clarified already. The first is that when we speak about saylan and ghusl, that we've defined ghusl as saylanul ma'i ala jami'il badani bi niyatin makhsusatin. It is the flowing of water over the entire body with a specific intention. It's important to understand that saylan is not just a random word. It's a word that's specifically used. Every word in our definitions is a word that is specifically chosen, that includes some things and it excludes other things. So the flowing of water over the entire body precludes, meaning it eliminates the concept of wetting the entire body, as we explained in wudu. There's a difference between washing and wetting. Wetting just makes the water cover the surface without any flow of water. Washing has to have saylanul ma, which is the flowing of water over that particular limb. In other words, water drips down, water actually flows over the surface area. The second item of discussion here is the first factor that breaks one's ghusl, which is ilajul hashafati fil farji. It's the entering of the head or the glands of the male private part into the vagina. This refers to the head of the male organ, and for an uncircumcised person, it refers to the exposed part, right? For the uncircumcised male, then the entire gland is not visible, but then it would refer to the exposed part. If this portion or its equivalent in a male, if this portion or its equivalent in a female enters the private part, then a ghusl becomes obligatory. So, in other words, when we say that sexual defilement necessitates a ghusl, it's not as general as that, as in any act of sexual intimacy requires a ghusl. That's not the case. Specifically here we are explaining the limitations, that it must consist of penetration of the male organ into the female organ to the point where the entire gland, the entire head of the male organ enters and is no longer visible. If the entire head of the male organ did not enter the female private organ, then a ghusl is not obligatory, right? Obviously, if there's any fluids and so forth, it must be washed away and the like for other reasons. But as far as a ghusl is concerned, a ghusl will only be necessitated when penetration actually takes place in the way that was described, and Allah knows best. The second factor that necessitates a ghusl is khurujul mani. It's the exiting of mani, sperm. And the emission of sperm, or ikhrajul mani, means the discharge of semen from the male organ, right? Its apparent sign is when you have khurujul mani, or ejaculation as it is called in English, then the signs that it is in fact mani and ejaculation is that it comes out with a heightened sense of pleasure. It comes out in gushes or spurts, and it has a certain type of quality. If a person is unsure whether the discharge that came from him was in fact semen, then one can distinguish it by these qualities, these characteristics. And what are they? Semen is usually thick, white, and emitted with force or spurts. It's followed by a sense of tiredness, usually. If, however, the discharge was pre-seminal fluid, so the person was aroused, but they didn't quite ejaculate, still they discharged some fluid. This is called pre-seminal fluid, or madhi, right? Or sometimes you have post-seminal fluid, which is some fluid that still excretes after ejaculating, which is referred to as wadi. It's also something that comes out from a male if he has not ejaculated for a while and he picks up something heavy or he exerts himself, he may discharge some of this fluid, also known as wadi or post-seminal fluid. In these instances, ghusl is not required, only wudu, and the secretion, the madhi and the wadi, that would be regarded as najasa, and it needs to be washed off from one's clothes. As opposed to semen. If semen is on a person, then that's not considered najasa according to the Shafi'i school, and it would not, if for example you have it on your person or on your clothing, it wouldn't invalidate your salah. So that was number 2, khurujul mani. Number 3, al-thalithu, al-hayd, menstruation. Now, of course, this is specific to a woman, and hayd is something that women experience on a monthly basis under normal circumstances, and it's also something that we cover in fiqh at different levels depending on the level of teaching. So we'll cover it later on in tahara as well, inshallah. But in essence, it is the biological process of a woman wherein her natural cycle of making an egg available for fertility, that if it's not fertilized, then a body goes into a cycle where it expels that egg and she bleeds for a certain number of days, and then the process starts again. So hayd, when it ends, would also require a ghusl in order to get back to a state of complete purification. The next point is al-Rabi', number 4, al-Nifas, which is postpartum bleeding or postnatal bleeding. That's the type of bleeding that comes from a woman after giving birth to a child, and therefore, of course, is also unique to a woman. And that usually lasts on average about 40 days, and it can be up to 60 days. It's also something that we deal with later on in Tahara, inshallah. Al-Khamis, number 5, is al-Wilada, childbirth, right? Giving birth to a child. Al-Wilada is another factor that necessitates a ghusl. So if a lady gives birth to a child, then she would perform a ghusl thereafter. Now, of course, this means that she's not bleeding. If she is bleeding, if she experiences nifas, and you must experience nifas, sometimes it can be as short as a moment, and if that is the case, then the moment is over, she performs a ghusl and khalas. But let's say, hypothetically speaking, it's practically no nifas, she just bled at the time of giving the, birth to the child, then even though there was no nifas technically, she would still give herself a ghusl because of giving birth to a child. That was number 5. And then number 6, the final reason for why we need to perform a ghusl is al-maut, is death. Now, of course, a person who dies can't perform a ghusl for themselves, which is why it's a fard kifaya on the community to have the ghusl performed for anyone who passes away. Which again means that ghusl is obligatory for a deceased Muslim, and the only exception to this is the martyr, the shaheed, who is killed in battle, because the Prophet ﷺ instructed that the deceased be washed. However, if the person died showing no signs of life, such as breathing or movement, this is obviously referring to a stillborn. If a person is born showing no signs of life, even if it's after 4 months of gestation in the mother's womb, then the washing is not required if they show no signs of life. Tamam? But again, that's something that we deal with when we look at janaza, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And there we have it, the 6 reasons for, or the 6 causes that make a ghusl obligatory, also known as mujibatul ghusl, those factors which make ghusl obligatory. And just to revise, so that is the emission of semen, which means ikhrajul mani, ilajul hashafati fil farj, the penetration or insertion of the glands of the male organ into the vagina, khurujul mani, the emission of, khurujul madhi, the emission of pre-seminal fluid, or wadi, post-seminal fluid, al-hayd, menstruation, al-nifas, postnatal or postpartum bleeding, and al-maut, death. Now that we've covered the elements that would make a ghusl obligatory, right? So you now know if any of these matters happen to me, then I need to perform a ghusl. The next logical question is, so how do I perform a ghusl? Or even more basic, what's the essential things that I need to do in order for me to have a ghusl, right? So in other words, I'm not asking about the optimum, how best to perform a ghusl. I'm asking, okay, so what do I need to do in order for me to have a ghusl? And that's what we're looking at now, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Furudul ghusli. Furud, plural of the word fard. It has another plural which is fara'id. Furud means the obligatory elements of a ghusl. Another word for that is a rukn, right? And a plural of the word rukn is arkan. So the arkan of ghusl, or the furud of ghusl, ithnani, there are 2. The first is an-niyatu, the intention. The second is wa ta'mimul badani, right? The generalizing over the entire body, bil ma'i, with water. In other words, allowing water to cover the entire body. Now, 2 things are mentioned here only. And that means that the answer to our question as to what's the minimum that I need to do in order to secure a ghusl, the answer is 2 things. What are those 2 things? Having an intention for ghusl, and 2, ensuring that water reaches the entire body. And yes, that means that it is as simple as that. if you need a ghusl, so in other words, if the 6 factors that we mentioned before apply to you, any of them, and you need to perform a ghusl, if you know nothing else except what we've just covered, then you should be fine. Because in order for you to have a ghusl, you need to ensure these 2 things are done, which is to have the intention. What is the intention? And then to ensure that water reaches over the entire body. So let's analyze this for a moment. What is the intention, right? For most Shafi'is, especially non-Arab Shafi'is in the world, when they hear the word intention, generally people's mind rush towards a formulaic expression of what we are going to do. And it usually starts with the word nawaitu. So for example, before we pray, we say nawaitu an usalliya, and then whichever salah we are praying. Now that there is an expression of one's intention, right? That's vocalizing one's intention. But the intention itself is in the heart, right? إنما الكلام وإن الكلام لفي الفؤاد وإنما جعل اللسان على الفؤاد دليلا. Our true speech, our dialogue, our real voice is in the heart. The tongue is merely an indicator. It's merely a sign as to what is in the heart. So when we speak about an intention, in the Shafi'i school, it is recommended to vocalize an intention and to state your niyyah. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ did so in Hajj. He would say, Hajj and Umrah, he would say, Labbaik Allahumma, and then he would state his intention as to what he's doing. So our scholars looked at that and have applied it elsewhere, and they said that, look, for the Shafi'is, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ covers everything. Actions are by the intentions. So your action must have an intention for it to be valid. Otherwise, it's not going to be an action. It's just a normal practice. Number 2, your intention is in the heart, right? So what exactly is that? How do we understand it? The way my teacher explained it, and it stuck with me ever since, is that intention in the Shafi'i school, because it must be present at the time of starting the act of worship, so in salah at the time of Allahu Akbar, in wudu at the time of washing the face, in ghusl at the time of washing the first limb that you start washing. And the intention is essentially to have an acute awareness of what you are doing. Acute meaning you are not confused or a bit vague about what you are doing. You're absolutely clear. You have acute consciousness or awareness of purpose. In other words, of what you are undertaking. That is essentially the intention according to the Shafi'i school. And if you have acute consciousness of purpose at the beginning of an act of ibadah, then that's a valid intention by the Shafi'i madhab, and you don't need to be acutely conscious of your purpose till the end of the act of worship. Of course, you should try to be present of heart, mind and soul, but it's natural and normal for one's mind and heart to wander a little bit. So the intention, an-niyyah mahalluha al-qalb. The place of the intention is in the heart. And you will find in the Shafi'i literature that expressing it is considered to be recommended, but not required. To the point that I would state, if you say completely incorrect words, right? You say nawaitu, you're about to perform a ghusl, but you intend salah. Nawaitu an usalliya farda salat al-maghrib. But you just said it absent-mindedly because you're used to saying something. In your heart, you are completely aware of the fact that you are doing a fard ghusl. Then that intention is completely valid because what's in the heart is what counts. If, on the other hand, you expressed an intention and you say, I intend nawaitu, you give an expression to your action. Let's say it's maghrib. Nawaitu an usalliya farda salat al-maghrib. So you say the correct intention. But the problem is that in your heart, you are actually thinking that it's Isha. The only reason why you said maghrib is because you had a slip of tongue. Your slip of tongue was correct, but it wasn't correct in your heart. That's an invalid intention because what counts is what is in the heart, and Allah knows best. Now, the second factor that is mentioned here is ensuring that water reaches the entire body. So what does that mean? That means the whole body, the skin, right? The appearance, the skin, the outer hair, the outer and inward hair. And if the hair is thick, like you have a certain type of hairstyle that's braided or it's thick, etc., then for the very least, what is visible of the hair, skin and roots, must be washed outwardly and inwardly. Even if the hair is dense and thick, you would need to pour water into that thick hair. Then the second point is, if the hair is braided specifically, then it must be undone if it prevents water from reaching inside. But if it doesn't prevent water from reaching the inside, then you can just pour water through it and that's fine. Then third point, if there is an open wound or a split nostril, then its outer part must be washed. But the inside of the nose, the cavity, is not obligatory. So let's say you have a cut, right? Then you just need to wash the outer part, and the inside of the nose, that's not obligatory, that's considered sunnah. Although I need to add that in the Shafi'i school it says ta'meemul badni bil ma, the entire body should be covered with water. The inside of the mouth and nose is not considered part of the entire body according to the Shafi'i school, so it doesn't have to be washed. But in the Hanafi school, you must wash it. So as a result, khurujan min al-khilaf, because it's recommended to step outside of the frame of differences of opinion, it would be recommended to always wash the mouth and the nose as well as part of the ghusl, to ensure that your ghusl is valid both according to the Shafi'i school as well as according to the Hanafi school, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Now, okay, that covers the essentials. If I have the intention and I cover my entire body with water, after I experienced something that necessitated ghusl, then I need to perform a ghusl. And if I do those two things, my ghusl is completely valid. But hold on a minute. Didn't we say that in every act of worship you have the definition, then you have the integrals, but then you also have shurut, conditions, and you have mubtilat, nullifiers, and you have sunan, recommendations. So where's that? So yes, we're going to go into the shurut of the ghusl, but alhamdulillah, the author so kindly already covered this for us. How so? He says, shurutul ghusli, right? The conditions of the ghusl. Shurutul ghusli, the conditions of the ghusl are, here it is shurutul wudu'i, the same as the conditions of ablution, as-sabiqatu, that had already been mentioned. Tamam? So we'll go through them again, inshallah ta'ala, because these are the first few lessons of the course, and I would like to be thorough as much as I possibly can be with the text, at least at the beginning, and once we've sort of got the ball rolling, then we can be a bit more flexible with our approach. So to revise, because we have covered this in wudu, the shurut of the ghusl are the same, so we can look at them again as a revision bi'idhnillah. Shurutul wudu'i, the conditions of wudu, 15 are 15. So that means the conditions of ghusl are the same, 15. Now some of them are so obvious that you wouldn't even consider them a shart, but if you think about it, technically they are always conditions. The first one is al-Islamu, right? So being a Muslim, because if you're a non-Muslim, your ghusl or your wudu or your salah or anything else will not be valid. Wat-tamyizu, that for the very least, if it's a child, a prepubescent toddler, then that's, they're playing, right? But if the child reaches the age of distinction or discrimination, the age of 7 or around about there, right? Age of tamyiz is what we call it in Arabic. Then that's going to be a valid ghusl or a valid wudu, even though they are not mukallaf. They'll get the reward for it, right? The third point, وَالنِّقَاءُ عَنِ الْحَيْضِ وَالنِّفَاسِ. You need to be free of hayd and nifas. So this is obvious for ghusl, because if you still have your hayd and your nifas and you perform a ghusl, it doesn't count, because the very thing that you are experiencing necessitates a ghusl. Tamam? The next part, وَعَمَّا يَمْنَعُ وُصُولَ الْمَاءِ إِلَى الْبَشَرَةِ. So, as is the case with wudu, if you have something on your limbs that will prevent water from reaching your limbs, the skin specifically, in ghusl, then that too needs to be removed. So we will give some special attention to casts and bandages and the like. But for now, we are looking at if a person has paint or some other waterproof barrier on their skin, then this needs to be removed before they can engage in a ghusl, a valid ghusl. The next point, وصول الماء إلى البشرة. The water must reach to the skin, right? So if you have anything, then it won't work. وَأَلَّا يَكُونَ عَلَى الْعُضْوِ مَا يُغَيِّرُ الْمَاءِ. There must not be on the limb that which will change the water. So let's say, for example, a person is about to get into a ghusl, but then they're thinking, look, the water is quite harsh on my skin. Let me apply thick moisturizer over my entire body, and then I'll jump into the shower, rinse my entire body off with the intention of a ghusl, and khalas. Right, then I've got a ghusl. No, that's not quite as simple yet, because you've introduced something onto your skin that when mixed with water will change the water. So now what is required is to first remove that substance that will change the water, meaning you have to rinse it off essentially, at least to the point where it's not changing the water so much that it's no longer called water. Tamam, which is something that we've already covered in wudu. And then وَالْعِلْمُ بِفَرْضِيَّتِهِ. One must have knowledge that it is obligatory. So you can't perform a fard ghusl if you don't know that you need a fard ghusl. You can perform a sunnah ghusl, yes, but you can't perform a fard ghusl if you don't know that you need one. So you need to know what is obligatory and what necessitates it, which of course we've learned now. And وَأَلَّا يَعْتَقِدَ فَرْضًا مِنْ فُرُوضِهِ سُنَّةً. One must not believe that an obligatory element of the obligatory elements of the ghusl, so either the niyyah or washing of the entire body, is a sunnah. And then lastly, I think it's the last one, al-ma'u tahuru. The water needs to be clean. The water needs to be clean and purifying. Tamam? So in the Shafi'i school, again, water can either be pure or purifying, or it can be contaminated. There's another subtle category called disliked water, but that's sort of extremely limited. What are the differences between these categories? Now, this text doesn't go into it to such a great extent as other texts, but very simply put, ma'ul mutlaq is unrestricted water, water without any other qualifications. You don't have to say salt water. No, you don't have to say soapy water or water mixed with this, water mixed. It's water. And that's any water in its natural state. Any water in its natural state, essentially. So water in its natural unrestricted state is considered tahur, purifying. That means it's clean in and of itself and you can use it for processes of purification in Islam. That's what tahur means. Now, what happens if you take that water and you use it for a wudu or for a ghusl? So you've used it. Now, the water is not dirty. It doesn't contain najasa, but it's used. That's called pure water because it's not dirty, but you can't use it for a ghusl or wudu. The same thing applies with using water for something else. So if you wash the dishes, for example, and you add soap to the water is not dirty, but it's no longer unrestricted water. It's no longer water in its natural state. That's changed water, so you can't use that for processes of purification. It's still clean. If it's on your person, on your body, you don't have to go and wash it off. Your salah won't be invalidated. But it's not purifying. You can't use it to take a ghusl or wudu. And then, of course, you have contaminated water. And for our purposes, if you have water that is not a lot, not like a whole bath full of water, more than 200 liters, then any contamination that comes in contact with that water, if it's a little water, will cause that water to be contaminated, and not only used or pure, but actually contaminated means najasa. So if that water were to touch your person, then you would have to clean yourself because that's a contaminant. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Tamam, so that's the ghusl in a nutshell. What have we covered and what is there still to cover? Now, firstly, what we have covered, here is the first part of this topic. And in the first part of this topic, we looked at the definition, right? We looked at what necessitates a ghusl, the mujibat al-ghusl. Then we looked at the obligatory elements of the ghusl, which were two, the niyyah and covering the entire body with water. Then we looked at the conditions of the ghusl, which are the same as the conditions of the wudu. And that covers what we are going to cover here. What are we going to look at in the next lesson, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala? In the next lesson, we look at the sunan, the recommended acts of a ghusl. And we also look at the disliked acts, those things that are makruh in the ghusl. And we also look at the recommended types of ghusl, the various occasions for which it is recommended to perform a ghusl. And the recommended, that which is haram or prohibited when you don't have a ghusl. Tamam? And then that will lead us to the end of this discussion. So we have looked at ghusl, the definition, the causes, and the integrals in this first half. Until next time, inshaAllah ta'ala, jazakumullahu khairan for joining me. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Subhanallahi wa bihamdi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
لا إله إلا الله